Hello, so this is the seventh and final episode of my series of kind of narratives of the years 1625 to 1701. And in this episode, I'm going to be talking through the years 1688 to 1701. So we left off in the last episode where James the Second had fled, and William had just landed at Torbay. James had fled, and this is where we are now. So 1688, William marches into London and calls the Convention Parliament. And at this point, it's still kind of unclear as to what's actually happened. And the Whigs and the Tories, who are the two kind of parties that have emerged here, have different justifications for what's just happened. The Whigs, as I said previously in the last episode, in the exclusion crisis, were very keen to kind of oust James because he was Catholic. And they justify this through kind of Locke's theory of the social contract, that James, by being Catholic and trying to impose Catholicism on the nation, has broken the social contract. On the other hand, the Tories justify this, some Tories justify this, by saying that James had abdicated. He'd fled, he'd given up the throne, and therefore he'd abdicated. So that's where we are. William comes to London, calls the Convention Parliament. So William's obviously married to Mary. They were cousins. So William was James's nephew, as well as being his son-in-law. Mary was obviously did have lineage to the throne as well, being James's daughter. So they both had a kind of claim to the throne. And why was William keen to take the throne? Well, on one hand, obviously, he's Protestant. He's seen as this kind of Protestant saviour against, the Catholic James. But a key reason, and some historians have argued this, the most important reason, was his war with France, his war with Louis XIV. And this is known as the 9 Years' War, which breaks out officially in 1689, where it's England and the Dutch provinces against France, and this is a really, really significant European war. It cost the country a huge amount of money. I'll come into this in more detail. But some historians have argued that basically William took the English throne because he wanted to use the resources of England to fight against Louis, and to use the navy to fight against Louis. So this is one reason why he was keen to take the throne. So this is going on in the background. This becomes really important because obviously, as we know, in this period and any period, war costs money. So there is a kind of political implication for this war. Also, what's passed in 1689 is a Toleration Act. So Parliament passed this, which is giving toleration to Protestant dissenters, not to Catholic worshippers, as James would have wanted, but to Protestant dissenters. And this, although on paper it looks like, freedom of worship for Protestants, what remains is the Toleration Act and the Corporation Act, which remain in place. So that means, did I say the Toleration Act? I mean the Test Act and the Corporation Act remain in place. So these are pieces of legislation which mean that if you want to hold public office, you have to swear allegiance to the Anglican Church. So people like Quakers, dissenters, any kind of dissenter, Protestant dissenter, can't hold public office. So the Toleration Act gives freedom of worship, but it doesn't open the door for dissenters to have kind of political influence. So in terms of this question of Anglican supremacy, I would argue that it's the end of Anglican supremacy in terms of worship, but not in terms of political power. The Anglican Church is still dominant. Okay, so in terms of politically what's going on, so William and Mary go before Parliament in 1689 and are originally read the Declaration of Right, which becomes the Bill of Rights, this kind of cornerstone of the British Constitution. And basically what happens is the Declaration of Right is quite kind of powerful. It sets out the limits of monarchical power. But in order to get it passed by Parliament, it's watered down into the Bill of Rights. So the Bill of Rights puts, as I said, limitations on the monarch's power. However, there is some historians have said, it's not clear what happens if William and Mary don't abide by this. There's no mechanisms of enforcement. For example, it says there should be free and regular elections, but it doesn't define free or regular. And also, it's not necessarily new. We've had things like the Petition of Right in 1628. It's not necessarily completely new. It's more stating in one place what kind of existing conventions. However, some people still argue that that's really important because it is in one place for the first time. So Declaration of Right is kind of more powerful, it's slightly watered down to the Bill of Rights 1689. And I'll come on to kind of historical interpretations at the end, but this is the thing that Whig historians like Macaulay, writing in the 19th century, argued made this the Glorious Revolution. This is what it's all about, the kind of, this change from a kind of absolutist monarchy or moving towards an absolutist monarchy to a more parliamentary constitutional monarchy, I should say. Okay, so we're moving into 1690, and this is the year of the Battle of the Boyne. So William's forces and James's forces meet in Ireland, and James suffers this significant defeat. William is victorious, and this is the end of James's attempts to take back the throne. Obviously, we have kind of Jacobite uprisings in the following century, but for this period that I'm talking about here, this is really the end of that. In terms of politics and finance, we have the Public Accounts Act, which sets up commissions to oversee government spending. So really, we start to see what some historians talk about as a kind of modernising of government finance. And this is something that hasn't really happened before. People are looking into and questioning how the government is spending money. Okay, we're skipping ahead to 1694, and this is when the Bank of England is established. And this is, the idea behind it was by Charles Montague, who was a Whig. And really, the Bank of England it's a way of the government, the monarch and the government, getting long-term loans, because William had relied on short-term loans for the war, and the Bank of England is set up to provide long-term loans, so lower interest rates, more stability for the country and for the economy. And really a significant part of this is that, finance really now moves into the hands of Parliament rather than being at the monarch's say-so. So this is quite a significant moment. However, William still did, majority of the time use short-term loans. Also in 1694, a significant moment is the Triennial Act, where Parliament passes this act which ensures that Parliament has to be called every 3 years. So we've had the Triennial Act in 1641, which was then watered down and repealed following the Restoration. So this is brought back, and it really is showing the power of Parliament here, that they can pass a Triennial Act and really stop the dissolving of Parliament. In 1696, moving ahead here, in 1696, we have the Recoinage Act, which is an attempt by Parliament to stabilise the economy, and they do a kind of recoinage to stabilise the currency because of coin clipping, which means that the sides of coins have been shaved off. Also in 1696, we have the February plot against William, and William associates this plot with some Tories are kind of implicated. So he moves from being supportive of the Tories, who are more in favour of monarchical power, more to the Whigs, who are not his natural allies. They are people who want more power for Parliament, but he has nowhere else really to turn. He has to turn to the Whigs following the February plot. So this gives Parliament even more leverage. So William's reliant on them for finances during the war, and now he's kind of allied with them because he's turned against the Tories. In 1697, We have the Peace of Ryswick, which is the end of the 9 Years' War. And really, the key thing about this is just the amount of debt that the country's in. The national debt stands at over £16 million, which is a huge amount in those times. 1698, we have the Civil List Act, which gives William £700,000 a year for life. So this, again, it's kind of modernising the finances. It's not like the monarch now has to go to Parliament every time they want money. It's kind of stabilising things. And I think this is something a lot of historians have said about the Glorious Revolution, that really it's kind of resolving lots of issues. So if you think about religion, the Toleration Act has resolved that. If you think about finances, the Civil List Act and the Bank of England have kind of resolved that. In terms of politics, well, we've had the Triennial Act. In terms of like the power balance, we've had the Bill of Rights. The next thing to talk about is the final thing, is the Act of Settlement, which is really, we can see that as a reaction to William's rule. So because Mary has died, and the next in line is Anne. Anne hasn't had any kind of surviving children, so following Anne, it passes the succession. Anne, of course, is James's other daughter, so Mary's sister. The Act of Settlement passes succession to the House of Hanover. It also bars Catholics from succession. It puts more limits on monarchical power, saying monarchs can't go to war to defend their own country. They can't leave the country without the say-so of Parliament and things like that. So the Act of Settlement is even more forceful than the Bill of Rights. So in terms of the balance of power, you know, I think it's pretty clear that by 1701, Parliament is a kind of partner in government here. The monarch's still very important. The monarch's still head of government and can make kind of key appointments and things like that, and can still veto. And actually, Anne is the last monarch to veto legislation. William has vetoed the Triennial Act in 1693, but was obviously forced to go ahead with that in 1694. So, really, by 1701, I think it's pretty clear that the Parliament are a partner in government. So what have historians said about this, the Glorious Revolution, this period, 1688 to 1701? I mean, even that term, the Glorious Revolution, is incredibly contested. And Whig historians who are writing in the 19th century and maybe up to the mid-20th century, like Macaulay, say that the Glorious Revolution is the reason that Britain didn't have a kind of, it had a preserving revolution 1688 and 89, and that meant that it didn't have a destroying revolution in the 18th century like other countries like France, for example. Macaulay says this is the reason why Britain has an empire, why Britain is has the Industrial Revolution, because of the kind of this Glorious Revolution gets Britain back on the path of kind of stability and progress away from absolutism, Catholicism. The Whig historians, I should say, focus primarily on 1689, really focusing on, the Toleration Act and the Bill of Rights. Marxist historians, on the other hand, who are writing from the kind of 1960s onwards, say that the Glorious Revolution isn't a revolution at all. It shouldn't even be considered a revolution. They say, actually, the real revolution was the 1640s, where Charles I had his head cut off and there's a civil war, and they look at the class divisions, involved in that. So they write this off and say it's a bourgeois revolution. It's only of the kind of elite. It changed the monarch. It didn't change the country. It didn't change, Parliament. Didn't change the way things worked. And then we get the revisionists who are writing from the kind of 1980s onwards. And they take a broader look. They've got broader scope. So going up to 1701, and they think about finance. They think about religion as well as parliamentary power. And revisionists say, actually, the Glorious Revolution was revolutionary. It had a long-term impact. It had a widespread impact. And people like Steve Pincus argue that it's just as revolutionary as the Russian Revolution, as the French Revolution. This is, in terms of the impact, and Pincus takes into account the war, the Williamite wars in Ireland, also obviously the 9 Years' War, and saying that thousands and thousands of people were involved. So really it comes down to how you define the revolution, whether you think this is revolutionary or not. Okay, I hope that was useful. Thank you for listening, and please leave any comments or questions below. Thank you.